there everybody, and welcome back to the Blossom Crochet channel. In this crochet tutorial I will be showing you how to do that beautiful granny rectangle blanket with this absolutely gorgeous texture. So it is a 2 round repeat once you've got your setup row going, so it's a nice simple pattern that you can just be getting on with. Sorry, someone's being very helpful there. So I'm using Shapey's stone washed yarn. I've used 4 different shades and I've done 2 rounds of each colour. As I mentioned when I made this as a square, you do need to go up at least a half hook size, maybe even a whole hook size, just because it can be quite a stiff closed stitch, so it just gives it that little bit of flexibility. So I would definitely recommend going up at least a half hook size. So as I say, this is the rectangular version. If you want the square version, then the link will be in the description box. But yeah, we're just going to jump in with this gorgeous rectangle. If this is your first time visiting my channel, then do make sure that you click that subscribe button now, and also click on the little bell icon so that you can get notified whenever I upload a new tutorial. So you want to start with a foundation row, and you want to do this in a multiple of 3. So obviously the longer the chain that you choose to do now, the more length you will get in the sides of your rectangle, if that makes sense. The shorter you do the chain, the more similar to a square it would be. The longer you do your chain, the more rectangular it will be. So the longer sides and then much shorter sides. So I'm going to be doing a chain of 18. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So once you've got your foundation chain, you want to work back to the 6th chain. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6, and into the 6th chain you're going to put 3 treble crochets. So please do remember I'm working in UK terminology. In the US these are your double crochet. So 3 trebles into the 6th chain. So yarn over, insert into that 6th chain, yarn over and pull up, and you'll have 3 loops on your hook. Yarn over, pull through the first 2 loops, yarn over, pull through the last 2 loops. And again, straight back into that same chain space, you'll do another treble and a 3rd and final treble, all worked into that same space. You're then going to skip 2 chains, so you're going to skip 1 and 2, and then again 3 trebles into the 3rd. So these are your granny clusters. So a granny cluster is just 3 trebles all in the same space, whether it's a chain or a chain space. Again, skip 2, granny cluster in the 3rd. So if you work that all the way along, so granny cluster, skip 2, granny cluster for the length of your chain. So I'm doing 3 trebles into that very last chain. So you should have been able to skip 2 and then work your final granny cluster in that very last chain space. But we've got all of these skipped stitches at the start, and we want to replicate that at the end here. So you want to chain 5, and then you're going to slip stitch into that same end space. So into that space and slip stitch, so yarn over and pull through both loops. So that's given us our centerpiece to work into now, the rest of our stitches. So okay, so at this point I'm going to slip stitch into this chain space just here. I'm going to slip stitch into there, and I'm going to work up from this place. So I'm going to chain 2, which is going to count as our first treble. And so I want 2 more trebles back into that chain space. So 1 and 2. We're then going to work along like we would with a normal granny square. So your next granny cluster will go in the next chain space. So 3 trebles. And again, skip to your next chain space. And again, I've got one final chain space here to work into, so I'll do my granny cluster in this space. So now we're at that funny loop. So in this loop we're going to be creating a corner plus the start of this side and then another corner. So you want to do into this loop space, you're going to do a granny cluster. You want to chain 2, which is your new corner space. You want to then go back into that loop and do another granny cluster. So that is the start of our other side. You want to chain 2 again to create another corner and then a granny cluster back again into that same space. Okay, so that is our new side and chain 2 corner spaces completed. We're then going to work along this edge again like we would with a normal granny square, so into these same spaces you will be putting granny clusters. So in between each of those granny clusters from the last round, you will work a new one. Okay, so again I'm at that funny little loop, so we're going to do the exact same thing as what we did at the other end. You're going to put granny cluster into the loop, 1, 2, 3, I'm going to chain 2, and then another granny cluster, chain 2 and another granny cluster, all in that same space. Okay, so at this point we're ready to close off the round, so you want to close with a slip stitch to the top of that chain 2 that you did at the beginning of the round. And that is how you should be looking at the moment. Obviously it doesn't look like much until you really start to build up the pattern. So what I'm going to do at this point is turn my work. So I'm going to do one final round in this dark blue because you want 2 rounds of each colour, but I'm not counting this first row because you can't work your post stitches into this row. So I'm going to do one more round of this dark blue and then switch. And that is when we will also start joining in the corners and things, which will give you a beautifully straight rectangle. So what we want to do is slip stitch back into that space. So it's not very easy to see, but you've got a space between your 2 trebles here. So I'm just going to slip stitch back into that space and chain up 2 from here. And then again, back into that same space, I'm going to put 2 trebles, 1 and 2. So we're at a corner chain 2 space already. So at this point you want to create a new corner. So you're going to do granny cluster, chain 2, granny cluster, all into that same space. Like I say, make sure you're chaining 2 for your new corner. Back into that space you'll put another cluster, 1, 2, and oops, and 3. So we're going to jump over this short edge and we're going to go straight to your next chain 2 corner space and do a new corner. So granny cluster, chain 2, granny cluster, all in the same space again. So now we're ready to work our long edge again. So again, granny cluster into each of the spaces between your other ones from the row below. And you'll work that all the way along to your corner space again, which is where you will create your new corner with your granny cluster, chain 2, granny cluster. And so if you repeat that all the way around, and I will meet you back where we started from in just a second. So I've worked into my final space between my grannies, and then obviously this is where we are going to be closing off the round. So again, into the top of the chain 2 you will slip stitch, and I'm going to be changing colours here, so I'm going to do a chain 1 and snip off. But I would just say, even if you're carrying on with the same colour, fasten off at this point and do exactly what I'm going to be doing, so that you can start and finish each round in the corner, which just makes your seams invisible. So as I say, even if you're continuing with the same colour or the same yarn cake, fasten off at this point. So I've chained 1, and then I'm just going to pull that tail out. So at this point you also want to turn your work around, and then you can join in any chain 2 corner space. And you want to start with a slip knot on your hook. You can of course just attach your yarn in chain 2, it's completely up to you. I however will be doing a standing stitch. So I've got my slip knot, I'm going to yarn over and hold, and then I'm going into a corner chain 2 space, yarn over and pull up. I've got my 3 loops, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, and that just gives you a normal treble stitch. So into this space now you're going to put 2 more trebles to create our granny cluster. And we will finish this corner when we come back around later on. Okay, so we're going to go into this next space here, and you're going to put 1 treble, and now we are going to start building our texture. So you're going to be doing a front post treble around the middle treble from the granny cluster directly below. So yarn over, you're going to go around the back of this centre treble, so you're going to go around the back and out the other side. So you're going to go behind the whole post of that stitch. You'll yarn over and pull up. Now you don't want to finish your stitch at this point, you want to make sure that you've pulled it up tall like this, because otherwise your sides will bow in towards the centre. So you want to pull it up nice and tall, and then yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. And then you'll just need to move it out the way slightly so that you can see that space again where you worked your first treble, and you want to put your final treble into that space. And then again, skip to your next space, do a treble, and then again around the centre treble from the cluster directly below you'll do a front post treble. So around the back of that stitch, go around the whole of the stitch, yarn over and pull up, again pull nice and tall, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, and then move that to the side a little so that you can see that space once more where you worked your first treble, and put another one back in that same space. And you will just do that all the way along until you get to your corner space. So you'll do treble, front post treble. Remember, never keep it tight, always pull it up nice and tall, and then a normal treble back in that same space. So I will meet you at your corner space in just a second. So your corners will always be worked as normal. You won't be doing any post stitches in your corner spaces. You will literally just be doing a granny cluster, a chain 2, and another granny cluster, all in that same corner space. Like I say, you will not be doing any post stitches in the corners. Okay, so we've got 1 space to work along our short edge, so you will do that in the exact same way. So treble, and then front post treble round that centre treble from the cluster directly below, and again always pull up tall, and then a normal treble back in that same space, and then again you're at your corner. So cluster, chain 2, granny cluster. And then you're ready to work your long edge once more, and repeat that all the way along, and I will meet you as you get towards that final corner. Okay, so at this point we just need to finish off this corner. So we've already got one granny cluster in there, but we need to put another one. So quick granny cluster. Thank you, that's very helpful. And then you want to do a final chain 2. And then you want to slip stitch to the top of that starting stitch of the round. So that is how you should be looking at the moment. So you want to do 2 rounds of each colour, or at least an even number of rounds of each colour if you are changing colour. So we want to turn your work, and we're going to slip stitch back into that corner space. So slip stitch back. You want to chain 2, which counts as your first treble of the round, and then 2 trebles back in that same space. Okay, and then this round is just an ordinary granny stitch round, so you will just do as if you were doing a normal granny square. So you will just put a new granny cluster into every one of those spaces, and then your new corners will just be as they always have been. So granny cluster, chain 2, granny cluster, all in the same space. And then again you will work your edge a granny cluster into each of your spaces. So if you just work that round, and I will meet you to close off. And then finally we're going to finish off this corner space with a granny cluster, a final chain 2, and then you're ready to slip stitch to the top of that starting stitch of the round. Now at this point, as I say, I will be changing colour. If you weren't changing colour, you will simply turn and slip stitch back into your corner space and chain 2, and which will be where I would meet you in a second anyway. So that is what you would do if you needed to do that. However, I will be changing colour, so I will just chain 1, snip, and pull that through. So again, the most important thing is remembering to turn your work. Okay, so I'm going to bring in my next colour, and I will just show you the very beginning of this round, because this is just part of your pattern repeat. So again, I'm attaching a new colour. So I'll be starting with my slip knot on my hook. And again, starting any corner space, I like to mix mine up a bit so that all my joins aren't in the same side. Again, I'm going to just yarn over and hold, and into any corner chain 2 space I will do my standing stitch. And as I say, if you'd carried on with the same colour, you'd meet me at this point with a chain 2 anyway. So 2 more trebles back in that same space. And then again, we are ready to start working our textured stitches. So you will do a treble, and then you will do a front post treble around the middle treble of the cluster in the row directly below, pulling up nice and tall as always, and complete. And then move that to the side a little so that you can see that space again, and do another treble in that space. So that first one after a corner is always going to be different because you don't have any post stitches yet. So this next one now, we will do a treble, and then instead of doing it finding the centre, you will literally be doing it around the long front post stitch here. So it's really easy to get behind there. Like I say, just remember to pull up tall. And then back in that same space, another treble. So that is the only difference at that point, is your first ones after a corner will not be worked around a front post treble, they will be worked around finding that centre treble again. So work that all the way along to your corner space, where you will do granny cluster, chain 2, granny cluster, and work that all the way around, and I will see you one final time to close off here. So again, you just want to finish off that corner space with a granny cluster, Make sure you do your final chain 2 and then slip stitch to close the round. So at this point you should be able to go back and just repeat the regular granny cluster round, and you'll be able to just repeat those 2 rows over and over again until your project is the size that you want it to be. But I really do hope that this tutorial has been helpful for you. If it has, please do remember to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. But I will see you for another tutorial really soon. But thank you as always for watching, and bye for now.